My name is Sarah Wallace, and I was raised to believe obedience was the same as love. But when I dared to ask for recognition, my own father reduced me to a tool. Just good with numbers, he said. That day, I didn't fight back. But someday, he'll wish he'd listened. Because I'm not here to be tolerated. I'm here to take what should have been mine all along. Before we dive into this story of betrayal, strategy, and becoming the woman they never saw coming, tell me, where in the world are you watching this from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. Let's see how far this story travels. Brunch at the Wallace estate was as rigid and polished as the antique silverware lined neatly on the table. Every Sunday we performed this dance, Belgian waffles, soft jazz, and the unspoken rule, don't challenge Harold Wallace. My father, CEO of Wallace Logistics, patriarch of the house, and the man who reminded me, again and again, that I was brilliant so long as I stayed in the box he built for me. That morning, we sat in the wood-paneled dining room of his downtown Denver office, converted to resemble an elite social club. Family meals, he said, should reflect success, which meant everything, down to the monogrammed napkins, screamed legacy. I still remember when you solved that math riddle at 10, Dad said, chuckling to himself as he carved into his omelet. The judges thought she'd cheated, he added, looking around as if reliving a proud joke. But she just saw the pattern faster than anyone. I smiled softly, unsure if the praise came with a hook. I actually won a regional writing contest that year too, I said, folding my hands calmly on the table. Short fiction, remember, I was published in the state anthology. Dad paused mid-chew. The silence stretched. My mother, June, stirred her coffee without looking up. Harold finally scoffed. Literacy awards. He waved his fork as if swatting away a mosquito. That's soft stuff, Sarah. You were good with numbers, nothing more. It hit harder than I expected. Not because it was new, but because it never changed. Nothing more. I blinked. I spent 3 months on that story, I said, more to myself than anyone else. They gave me a standing ovation at the banquet. People clap for anything these days, he muttered. The room went so still you could hear the crystal water glass vibrate as I set it down. My voice, when it came, was thin with disbelief. You really believe that? That numbers are all I'm good for? Dad shrugged, unfazed. Some people have utility. Don't go chasing illusions because you had a phase. You're not a dreamer, Sarah. You're a processor. Mom finally looked up, frowned, said nothing, and that stung almost worse. Because silence in our house was agreement. My stomach turned. I'd come hoping for a real conversation, a small moment of recognition. But instead, I felt like a misfiled invoice, examined, dismissed, and shelved. I see, I murmured. He chuckled again, wiping his mouth with a linen napkin. Don't get sensitive now. It's a compliment. You just weren't made for fluff. I looked at the man who built an empire from cargo and concrete and realized he couldn't see past his own reflection. To him, I'd always be a tool in a suit, not a daughter with dreams. Across the table, June sighed, adjusting her pearls like she was bracing for a storm she wouldn't stop. I rose quietly, my plate half-eaten, my appetite long gone. Thanks for breakfast, I said, keeping my tone even. Dad didn't look up from his phone. Bring your resume next time. I might have something for you in billing. I nodded once, not because I accepted, but because I was already planning something bigger. He wouldn't see it coming. The Wallace estate sprawled like it knew it didn't have to impress anyone anymore. Decades-old brickwork, a manicured rose garden that changed color with the seasons, and white Adirondack chairs that no one ever actually sat in, except, occasionally, me. The one place in that house that felt like mine was the garden path behind the west wing, where the hedges were just wild enough to be honest. I had waited until late afternoon to approach him again. My father had finished his golf round and was nursing a scotch on the veranda, flipping through industry magazines like they were light fiction. I wore a navy blazer, crisp slacks, and my hair tied back, hoping the visual might help him see me not as a daughter, but as a mind worth listening to. I walked softly across the flagstones. "Hey, Dad," I said gently. He didn't look up. I've been thinking a lot about the firm's analytics department. I read up on your freight allocation models. There's a pattern in the West Coast route data. If we applied dynamic routing with seasonal adjustments, I think you could improve delivery time by 12–15%. His eyes flicked up, then back down. Interesting, he muttered. Encouraged, I sat in the chair across from him. I even made a mock-up dashboard in Tableau. It maps live KPIs against fuel efficiency. I'd love to show you. He cut me off with a laugh so sudden it startled a bird from the nearest tree. Sarah. I waited. He set down his glass, leaned back, and finally gave me his full attention, though not in the way I'd hoped. You don't have the head for strategy. I blinked. What? You're smart, no doubt. You can crunch numbers, maybe even run simulations, but strategy. He made a face like the word tasted wrong. That's not your strength. My voice came out tight. How would you know? You've never let me try. I know people, he said simply, and I know the kind of mind it takes to play the long game. You're precise, but you think too small, always have. I sat there, stunned, not because I was surprised, but because I had hoped foolishly that this time might be different. Dad, I just want a chance, I said quietly. I'm not asking for a title, I'm asking to learn. His mouth thinned into a line. You learn by watching, not by inserting yourself where you don't belong. And just like that, he stood. No acknowledgement, no conversation, just an ending. He walked off, steps echoing down the stone path, leaving behind the faint smell of cologne and scotch and rejection. I didn't follow him. I couldn't. Instead, I sat there in that garden surrounded by roses bred to bloom exactly on schedule. Flowers cultivated for appearance, not fragrance. Just like everything else here, beautiful on paper, hollow in practice. The breeze was light. The sun had dipped just low enough to cast the house in gold. I tried to breathe through the frustration tightening my chest. Mom found me there 10 minutes later. She always had a sixth sense for tension as long as it didn't require her to act on it. Is he in one of his moods? She asked, settling into the chair beside me, clutching her lemon water like a prop. No, just his usual clarity. She raised a brow. He told me I don't have the head for strategy. She didn't look surprised. What did you say? She asked, voice unreadable. I said I wanted to learn, that I didn't want a title. Just experience. June sipped her drink, eyes on the fountain across the lawn. You're lucky he even listens when you talk business. He never let me near the firm. That's not comforting, she shrugged. It's just how he is. He has his world and we have ours. I studied her face, lined with restraint. The kind of woman who'd survived not by confronting power but by decorating around it. Do you really believe that? I asked. That's what marriage is, she said, smiling faintly. You find your peace where you can. No offense, Mom, but that sounds like surrender. She didn't argue, just stood and straightened her blouse. You're not built for war, Sarah, she said softly. Don't mistake stubbornness for strength. As she walked back toward the house, I stayed seated, my pulse in my throat. Because in that moment, I understood something she didn't mean to teach me. They had no idea who I really was. And someday they'd regret not finding out. It was almost 2 years before Harold Wallace made me an offer. Not the kind of offer I'd dreamed of, nothing close to a role in analytics or strategy, but an offer nonetheless. He called on a Tuesday morning. No hello, no how are you, just. Come in tomorrow. Warehouse. 7th and Colfax. Ask for Greg. He'll put you to work. Click. I stared at the phone. That was it. After everything. After years of me asking, suggesting, submitting little project ideas like breadcrumbs, this was the grand invitation. Still, I showed up. Because sometimes you take the offer not for the role, but for the opening. Wallace Logistics' central warehouse was an enormous concrete block that smelled like motor oil and stale air. Trucks rumbled in and out, the loading bays full of men in steel-toed boots yelling over backup beepers. I arrived in slacks and a blazer. Rookie mistake. The woman at the front desk looked at me like I'd shown up in a ball gown. Greg's out back. Postal, she said, handing me a laminated badge that said temp in fading red letters. The postal department was a windowless room just off the dock, half office, half dumping ground for invoices, client returns, and vendor documents. The walls were tan, the carpet gray, the lighting, flickering fluorescents that buzzed when you breathed too loud. And there in the back corner sat my kingdom, a tiny desk wedged between 2 file cabinets, a dusty monitor, and a plastic chair with one short leg that made it rock slightly when I typed. Greg, the supervisor, was kind enough in a half-interested way. Middle-aged, ex-military with a permanent coffee stain on his shirt pocket. "Wallace?" he asked, squinting at my ID. "Like Harold Wallace," I nodded. Greg blinked, then chuckled. "Didn't think you people worked in rooms like this." "Neither did I said. He handed me a stack of invoices and pointed to the back cabinet. "You'll be logging these, sorting by client and date. Once you're done, file M by shipping tier. It's dull, but if you're fast, it helps." And just like that, my career at Wallace Logistics began, with ink-stained paper, misaligned spreadsheets, and the low thrum of being unseen. Days turned into weeks. The postal room didn't care who I was. Coworkers barely glanced up. Nobody asked where I came from or why someone with an economics degree was alphabetizing freight receipts next to a jammed copy machine. I kept my head down. I learned the rhythm of the place. When the mail cart arrived, how to decode Greg's sticky note instructions, and the best time to slip out for a quiet lunch in the back lot where the trucks idled. Each evening, I went home covered in dust and determination. Because I wasn't here for praise. I was here to watch. I started noticing things, contracts that cycled through more than once, order discrepancies no one flagged, mismatched vendor codes that slipped past the clerks. I took notes. Built a spreadsheet on my own time. I didn't complain, didn't correct, just observed. Harold never called to check in. June didn't ask how it was going. And at Sunday dinners, when someone asked what I did for work, I said, "Just helping with paperwork," and Harold grunted like I'd answered correctly. They thought they'd put me in my place, but what they'd actually done was give me a front row seat to every crack in the foundation. One evening, Greg leaned over my desk while I was closing a file. "You know," he said, "you're better than this job." I looked up. "Most temps last a week tops. You don't talk much, but you get things done. Fast, clean. Noticed you fixed the vendor log. That thing's been a mess for years." I shrugged. "Just wanted it to make sense." He nodded. "Well, word gets around. Someone might be watching." I smiled politely. But inside I was on fire because someone should be watching. Because maybe, just maybe, you don't need a seat at the table if you're already building a new table in the back room. It started with a shipment manifest that didn't add up. It was after hours, again. Greg had left an hour ago, the lights in the front office were off, and the warehouse floor buzzed with the soft clatter of forklifts backing into docking stations. I stayed late because the silence helped me think, and because no one noticed I was there anyway. That night, I was reorganizing the quarter's outbound invoices when I saw it. 2 entries for the same shipment, dated 3 days apart but logged under different contract numbers. It was nothing on its own. A clerical error, maybe, but it nagged me. I dug deeper. One entry claimed the shipment was routed through a subcontractor in Reno. The other showed it routed through Wallace Logistics directly. Same freight weight, same destination, different carrier payments, different markup logic. I checked the vendor portal, pulled up internal memos, tracked approvals. It took me 3 hours and 6 spreadsheets to trace the entire thread. What I found was this. If the contract had gone through as entered, Wallace Logistics would have eaten a $240,000 loss over the next year due to a coding misclassification in their automated billing system, one that flagged premium shipments as bulk freight and routed them under fixed-price carrier terms. The kicker: that loss would have affected their largest shipment deal with Clearwater Distributors, one of our top-tier partners. In short, the kind of thing that could cost the company not just money but trust. And no one saw it, except me. I wrote a report that night. 15 pages, detailed the error, flagged its impact, proposed a fix that involved auditing the entire Western region's freight database for similar errors. I attached the Excel sheets, formatted it in the company's internal memo template, printed a hard copy and slid it quietly into the outgoing mail tray marked, "To Mr. Wallace, private." I didn't sign it, I didn't need to. The next morning there was a memo on my desk, no signature, just a stamp. "Effective immediately, reassignment, junior accountant, report to floor 4. No thank you, no great catch. Just a new badge, a new floor, and the clear message, "You're useful." That was all I was ever going to get. I sat at my new desk in the accounting department, watching as Harold passed me in the hallway that afternoon. He nodded once, distracted by his phone. I watched his fingers swipe the screen, probably reviewing the report I wrote, probably quoting my insights in a meeting I wasn't invited to. And something inside me split. It wasn't pride I felt, it should have been. It was fury, contained like a spark beneath my breastbone, because I had just saved them. Quietly, precisely, without flair or need for applause. And they'd handed me a promotion with all the weight of a door being closed behind me. The new job came with a $3,000 raise and a corner desk without a view. No welcome, no onboarding. Greg sent me a single text, told you someone was watching. Good luck, Wallace. I stared at my new computer screen that afternoon, my heart pounding against my ribs. I should have been proud. I wasn't. I felt erased. Later that week, at Sunday dinner, Harold lifted his wine and toasted good decision-making at the quarterly board meeting. June beamed beside him, soaking in the admiration of their guests. And we caught a billing issue before it damaged the Clearwater account, Harold said, smug. Minor glitch, fixed with quick leadership, that's what keeps us ahead. No one looked at me. June chimed in, Harold's instincts are just uncanny sometimes. I sat there, hands folded around my napkin, willing myself not to speak. Because if I did, I might say something I couldn't walk back. Instead, I smiled, clinked my glass, and let them believe I was still playing their game. But inside, I was writing new rules. I stopped expecting thanks after Clearwater. The new role in accounting gave me access to more contracts, deeper records, and something even more valuable, proximity. From my desk on floor 4, I could see exactly how decisions were made, who held sway in the boardroom, and how errors were quietly buried under spreadsheets by people who didn't want to cause trouble. I wasn't here to cause trouble. I was here to be undeniable. So I started building models, on my own time, quietly, strategically. I'd work late again and use the company's contract database to cross-analyze projected freight costs against seasonal fuel prices, route congestion, and vendor volatility. I designed what I called risk maps, color-coded overlays that predicted which contracts would underperform within 6 months based on variables no one at Wallace Logistics was even tracking. Then I'd email them. Not signed, just a line in the subject, suggested review Q2 vendor outlook. The first time I sent one, Harold printed it out and took it into his executive meeting. I know because I saw my font, my formatting, and even my typo on slide 4 when it showed up in the meeting minutes. He didn't mention where it came from. Neither did I kept doing it. Weekly. He kept using them. Quietly. And everyone applauded his renewed strategic focus. June told guests at a fundraising dinner, Harold's so brilliant with numbers. He's just got that spark again, you know? The analysts are hanging on his every word. I stood 10 feet away in a gray cocktail dress, sipping flat champagne and wondering if ghosts ever get tired of being invisible. Because that's what I'd become, the ghost in the data. Present, essential, but unacknowledged. At family dinners, he'd look at me across the table and say, "Thanks for helping out in accounting," as if I was fetching coffee, not rewriting the company's risk infrastructure from a borrowed laptop in my apartment. Mom would beam and pass the potatoes. And I, dutiful, silent, composed, would nod like the well-trained daughter they still believed me to be. But inside, something had begun to shift. Not rage. That had come and gone. It was colder than that. It was resolve. I started tracking the usage. Which reports he used, which he ignored. What phrases he liked to quote. I'd highlight patterns. Test language to see what got a reaction. It was like training an algorithm, except the algorithm was a man who only saw value when it spoke in his voice. By autumn, he'd incorporated half my models into the company's new bid strategy. At a quarterly party, he toasted visionary foresight, and the team clapped. I stood in the back near the shrimp tray, hearing June's voice behind me. Harold's mind is just extraordinary. Sarah helps with the back-end numbers, of course, but really it's his leadership. I didn't flinch, because something about hearing her say it so sweetly, so offhandedly, made things crystal clear. This wasn't just oversight. It was design. They wanted my work, not my name. My mind, not my presence. My success only when it came packaged as his. That night, I went home and opened a blank document. At the top, I wrote 2 words, Granite Metrics. I didn't know it then, but that name would change everything. I found the loft by accident. A walk through Denver's Rhino District one Sunday morning, escaping a family brunch I couldn't bear to attend. The building was old, its brick facade chipped and painted with fading murals from a decade ago. But the For Lease sign in the window caught my eye. Inside, exposed beams, stained concrete floors, and a single cracked skylight that let in just enough light to make it feel like possibility. I signed the lease with what was left of my bonus, granted to me after Harold closed the Sinclair deal, thanks to my risk mapping model. He gave me a handshake and a terse, "Well done, kiddo." I smiled, and used that money to fund my exit. I named the company Granite Metrics. Quiet strength, unmoving, measured. Everything I had to become to survive Wallace Logistics. There was no fanfare, no ribbon cutting. Just me, one intern named Dylan Fresh out of CU Boulder's data science program, and 3 borrowed laptops I scrubbed and reloaded in my apartment over Takeout Lo Mein. Our first pitch was to a mid-sized beverage distributor struggling to forecast inventory spikes. I built a model using open-source tools, ran simulations, and handed them a 3-page strategy deck in under 48 hours. They signed the next week. Then came a boutique apparel logistics chain. Then a health tech supplier. Word got around. Clients weren't interested in who I was, they were obsessed with the accuracy of my models. They called it clairvoyant. I called it math and knowing exactly where companies go blind when they fall in love with their own legacy. 6 months in, Granite Metrics was paying its bills. Barely, but it was mine. And when the 4th client signed on, I made a decision that felt less like rebellion and more like chess. I began buying shares in Wallace Logistics, quietly, carefully, under the name Redstone Holdings LLC, a shell company registered to a mailbox in Golden, Colorado, with my name nowhere near the paperwork. They were penny shares at first, nothing that would raise an eyebrow, but I knew their rhythms. When the stock dipped after quarterly rumors or vendor tension, I bought. When Harold made flashy announcements to drive investor confidence, I waited. I wasn't just investing. I was building leverage. Dylan didn't ask questions. He was too busy automating client dashboards and figuring out how to run machine learning models on outdated laptops. "You ever gonna tell me where you came from?" he asked one night as we polished off instant ramen on the office floor. "Just someone who got tired of waiting to be seen," I said. He grinned. "Well, they're gonna notice you soon." I didn't answer, but I thought of my father's office, his polished wood desk, his dismissive nods. I thought of June's careful smiles and the way she'd say, "Let him have this one," like ambition was a resource rationed by gender. They still thought I was somewhere on floor 4, building forecasts they could steal. They didn't know I was rewriting the market from 6 miles away in a sunlit loft that smelled like burnt coffee and fresh beginnings. That spring, I sent Harold another anonymous report. He used it in a board presentation. At the next Sunday dinner, June raised a glass and said, "To Harold's gift for analytics, you really are the brain behind the brilliance." And I smiled, because if they still needed to believe that, good. It meant they hadn't seen me coming yet. I knew something was off the moment Harold called me into his office. It wasn't the kind of drop-by invitation he used when he wanted to steal credit politely. It was sharper, final. The message had come through our internal portal, brief, clipped, and unmistakably deliberate. Subject, meeting 11:30 sharp. Location, executive office, 18th floor. No smiley face from his assistant. No soft phrasing, just an execution time. I wore a tailored charcoal blazer that day. My hair tied back in a knot so tight it made my temples ache. I walked past the receptionist, who gave me a puzzled half-smile and knocked once before stepping inside. He didn't look up, just gestured to the seat in front of his desk. The office was the same as always, sweeping skyline views, leather chairs, walls lined with awards and framed business magazine covers. It reeked of empire. He waited until I sat, then said, "It's not working." I kept my face still. "What's not working?" "You and the company." A beat passed. I nodded slowly, buying myself time. "Is there a specific concern?" You've been distant, he said, folding his hands like a man delivering a eulogy. Less committed, less aligned with the family's vision. That word, family, he used it like a rope meant to bind, not protect. I've submitted every report on time, I said calmly. My forecasting models. Sarah, he interrupted, his voice sharp enough to clip the air. This isn't about numbers. Of course it wasn't. I gave you a chance, he continued. We opened the door, but it feels like you're not really here, not loyal, not invested. I almost laughed. Instead, I asked, what exactly do you mean by not loyal? He didn't answer directly, just leaned back, tapping his pen against the desk. It's best we part ways now, no hard feelings. We'll process a severance package. You'll return your badge, laptop, and company access by end of day. I stared at him. That was it. No warning, no reason I could refute, just a clean cut. You're firing me, I said, my voice perfectly level. I'm protecting the family, he replied, like that made him noble. You've been distant and disloyalty spreads. I wanted to ask what family, the one that silenced me at dinners, that used my work like a mirror but never once saw my face. But instead I stood, reached into my bag, took out my Wallace badge and placed it gently on the edge of his desk. He didn't touch it. Didn't look me in the eye either. I won't fight this, I said. I don't need to. He seemed surprised, like he expected rage, pleading something to confirm he still held the reins. But I only smiled, tired, hollow, because the truth was, I didn't need Wallace logistics anymore, and he had no idea how much of it I already owned. On the elevator ride down, I kept my hands clasped tightly in front of me. Behind my ribs, grief bloomed, not for the job, but for the years I'd spent trying to make this place see me. The money I'd poured into saving them from themselves. The parts of me I'd buried to be tolerable, to be useful. I stepped out into the lobby, handed over my laptop to it with a nod, walked out into the November wind without looking back. Outside, I took one breath, too. And then I whispered, never again. At home, I sat at my kitchen table for a long time. My inbox still open, my access still active for now. And I pulled up the trading dashboard for Redstone Holdings. I looked at the shares I had purchased. Quietly, strategically, and I smiled, because firing me meant nothing now. They had cut loose the very hand that had been keeping them afloat. They just didn't know it yet. The bonsai tree in Dr. Bloom's office had more patience than I did. Its tiny, twisted branches reached toward the light like it knew something I didn't, like it understood the slow art of growing around damage. I stared at it instead of her until I heard her soft voice break through the silence. So, she said gently, how do we begin today? I got fired, I said flatly. Her pen paused mid-note. You didn't mention that last week. Because last week I still thought I could fix it. That if I worked hard enough, delivered enough insight, eventually someone, anyone would say thank you. I shifted on the couch. But they never did. She nodded once, her expression unreadable. Was it abrupt? Entirely. No warning, no meeting beforehand. Harold, my father, just told me I was no longer aligned with the family vision. Said it was a matter of loyalty. Loyalty, she repeated, like tasting something bitter. He meant I wasn't his echo chamber anymore, I muttered. Outside, Denver was covered in a thin film of late autumn snow. It made everything look quiet, like the world had softened for a moment just to let me fall apart in peace. I've spent years being useful, I continued. Invisibly so. They used my mind but not my name, took my reports, praised his genius. My mother smiled through it, and I let them. Dr. Bloom waited. But getting fired, I said. That's the first honest thing they've done in years. And how do you feel about that? She asked. I hated the question. I paused, then exhaled. Like something cracked, and instead of breaking, I opened. She didn't speak, but I saw the faint curve of encouragement in her eyes. I've been holding a match in my hand for months, I admitted. Today I struck it. She tilted her head. What did you do? I told her. About granite metrics. About the shares I bought under Redstone Holdings. About the models I stopped submitting. About the moment I realized saving the company was costing me myself. And today, I said quietly, I sold everything. Dr. Bloom didn't react with shock. She rarely did. But something shifted in the room, like even the bonsai tree had turned to listen. You triggered a dump, she asked, surprisingly direct. 72,000 shares, I said. Scattered, traced to proxy entities, they won't know it was me, not yet. And how does it feel? I looked down at my hands, still trembling slightly. It feels clean, I said. Not like revenge, like a reset, like I finally stopped trying to prove I belonged to a family that only valued silence. She nodded. Sometimes letting go is the most powerful move. That evening, I walked home alone through the snow. My boots left quiet impressions in the sidewalk slush. The city buzzed around me, but I was still. Settled. Hollow in the way a room feels right after you've boxed up all the furniture. Echoes, but no weight. Back at my loft, I pulled up the trading dashboard. Wallace Logistics was already down 9.3% since noon. Investor forums were swirling with questions. Who sold off Redstone's block? Why is Wallace underperforming? Did we miss something in the last audit? No one had answers. And that, ironically, was the point. By morning, a second wave of panic would ripple. Creditors would hesitate. Contracts would stall. And the great Wallace legacy would teeter on the same silence it once demanded of me. I didn't gloat. I didn't cry. I just sat in the glow of my screen and whispered a single sentence into the dark. I'm not yours anymore. I never expected him to come to my office. Least of all holding flowers. The building that housed Granite Metrics was tucked between a craft brewery and a vintage bookstore. Barely marked, no valet, no boardroom with skyline views. Just glass doors, high ceilings, and whiteboards covered in formulas Dylan hadn't erased in weeks. I was reviewing a new model for a biotech supplier when the door buzzed. Dylan peeked around the divider. Sarah, there's a man here with a very expensive bouquet, says his name is Harold. For a moment, the name didn't register. Then it did. I closed my laptop, stood slowly, and smoothed my shirt like I needed to press the truth back into my skin. Send him in, I said. When he entered, he looked out of place. Not just because of the Tom Ford coat or the way his leather shoes clicked too loudly on our concrete floors, but because he wore an expression I hadn't seen since childhood, uncertainty. Sarah, he said, trying for warmth. You look well. He held out the bouquet, yellow roses. His secretary's touch, no doubt. My father didn't know my favorite flower, never asked. I didn't take them. He hesitated. Then set them down on the corner of my desk, brushing past Dylan, who lingered awkwardly near the espresso machine. Harold looked around. So this is it, Granite Metrics. He nodded slowly like he was trying to convince himself he wasn't impressed. You've done well for yourself. I leaned back against the edge of my desk. Why are you here? He smiled, a practice thing like a magician's coin trick. Thought it was time we talked, cleared the air. Didn't realize the air needed clearing, I said flatly. You made yourself pretty clear when you fired me. He waved a hand as if dismissing an old joke. Look, that was maybe hasty. Things were tense, but what matters is we're past that now, and I've been thinking there's an opportunity for us to work together again. I said nothing. He went on. Wallace Logistics is experiencing some temporary turbulence. Normal stuff. Investors get jumpy. But you understand the mechanics better than anyone. I thought maybe it's time to bring you back in. Let you fix what's broken. You always had a good head for numbers. It was surreal watching him rewrite history while standing in the consequences of it. He spoke like the last few years hadn't happened, like I hadn't been dismissed until the one day I wasn't. I'm not a contractor, I said, and I'm not a second chance. He blinked. I didn't say, you didn't have to. He paused, then softened his tone. We're family, Sarah. No, I said. We're a case study. And you're still writing the wrong conclusion. The room was quiet except for the hum of our server rack in the back office. Dylan had disappeared, smart kid. You're really going to let Wallace fall? He asked. There was a flicker of disbelief in his voice. After everything, I tilted my head. I already let go. What happens now, that's not my burden. He exhaled sharply like I'd struck something he didn't know was exposed. You've changed, he said. No, I replied. I stopped shrinking. He glanced around one last time, maybe hoping the walls would echo something more agreeable. I see, he said, reaching for the bouquet he'd brought, then hesitated, left it. As he turned to leave, I said, You should go, you have a company to fix. He paused in the doorway. You'll regret this, he said, not as a threat, but as a man who couldn't imagine a world where someone didn't need him. But I didn't respond. I just picked up the bouquet, walked to the break room, and slid it into the recycling bin without a second thought. Outside, the wind howled down the alley. Inside, my breath was steady. When Harold Wallace finally agreed to sell the company, the press called it a strategic pivot. Insiders called it a collapse. But I knew what it really was, a reckoning in slow motion. The sale wasn't immediate. It unfolded in painful waves, creditors circling like sharks, staff departures accelerating, key clients refusing to renew. Wallace Logistics had spent decades building an image of invincibility. Now, with its stock in freefall and Harold's reputation in tatters, that image cracked like glass. What Harold never seemed to grasp was this. Once trust leaves the building, revenue follows. I monitored it all from granite metrics. From the outside, I was still just the founder of a niche analytics firm with rising clout. No one suspected I was quietly orchestrating the endgame. I read the news reports like a ghost reads her own obituary, calm, detached, knowing exactly what was coming next. When Camille, my corporate strategist, called me on a Tuesday afternoon, her voice was crisp. "It's happening. They've scheduled the initial round of offers. You still want in?" "Yes," I said, "but not as me." She chuckled. "Of course not. That would ruin the fun." We built 3 fronts. Camille specialized in creating what she called surgical bidders, clean paper shell entities that appeared unrelated but funneled everything through a single strategic core. Me. Bidder 1 was a firm out of Austin with interests in AI logistics and warehousing. Bidder 2, an overseas entity backed by Canadian investors with a passion for revitalizing American brands. Bidder 3 was a lean private consortium, minimalist branding, maximum capital. No buzzwords, just numbers. We submitted under Bidder 3. The offer was direct. Full acquisition with contingency terms for staff retention and immediate debt absorption. It was the most attractive option without screaming ambition. Harold's camp didn't see it coming. They were too busy chasing flashier buyers who overpromised synergy and culture realignment. But those offers were riddled with ego, board reshuffling, and backdoor demands. Our proposal, silent, surgical, swift. By the second round, Wallace's legal team trimmed the bidder list to 3. We were still in. The final negotiations took place in a high-rise law office, overlooking the very skyline that once symbolized everything I wasn't allowed to touch. I didn't go. Camille did, flanked by advisors with quiet eyes and sharper pens. Harold was there too, stooped slightly, thumbing through documents with the weariness of a man who could feel the end but refused to name it. He never looked at Camille twice. She was just another lawyer in a tailored blazer. When the room quieted for the last time, Camille slid our final offer across the table. "We won't negotiate further," she said. "Our terms are clean. You can spend the next month haggling for optics, or you can stabilize today." Harold hesitated, then looked at the papers like they were written in a language he used to know. And he signed, just like that. The empire I'd been born into but never welcomed by, the kingdom I'd spent years holding up from the shadows, now belonged to me. And he didn't have the faintest idea. The official handover would take 2 weeks. During that time, I said nothing, released no press statements, let the office chatter spiral about new leadership and quiet takeovers. I watched from my loft as Wallace employees speculated on forums. Rumors flew, foreign investors, aggressive streamlining, maybe even liquidation. No one guessed the truth, that their new CEO already knew every floorboard in that building, every invoice system, every blind spot, and every name that helped Harold keep me in the back room. The final ownership document came via courier on a Thursday. I signed it in my kitchen. No ceremony. Just a single signature under the name Granite Metrics Holdings, LLC. I closed the folder and stared out the window, Denver's dusk casting long shadows across the brickwork. It was mine now, all of it. And they still didn't know who owned the keys. I wore navy. Clean, tailored, understated. No statement necklaces, no power heels, just sleek lines and steady breath, the kind of armor you wear when walking into the battlefield of your past. The car dropped me at the front entrance of Wallace Logistics at 8:27 a.m. for the first time. I didn't enter through the side loading dock or swipe into the lower floors where junior staff were expected to stay invisible. This time, I walked straight through the glass double doors, my heels echoing across the marble tile. Reception froze. "Can I help you?" the young man behind the desk stammered. I smiled. "I'm here for the executive floor. You'll find my name on the new authorization list." He blinked, tapped rapidly on his keyboard, and then stared. "Right this way, ma'am." The elevator ride to the 18th floor was longer than I remembered, or maybe it was just the weight of it all pressing in. The space where I'd once been dismissed, where my father sat on his polished throne, surrounded by men who thought I was a clerical convenience. The elevator dinged, doors opened, and every head in the executive bullpen turned. I saw them all. The finance director who once asked if I was Harold's assistant. The logistics VP who used to joke that I cleaned up nice for a numbers girl. The board secretary who never learned my name. Their faces froze. Whispers spread like sparks across dry grass. I walked through it all steady. And then I stepped into the main conference room, already filled with executives and board members for the 9:00 a.m. announcement they'd all been waiting for. The acquisition had been finalized, and they were told the new leadership would be introduced today. Nobody expected it would be me. Harold was already seated near the head of the table, next to June, whose tight smile twitched when she saw me. She leaned toward Harold, whispering something that didn't escape my ears. "Why is she here?" He turned, confused. "Sarah, this meeting isn't open to former staff." I paused at the doorway. "On the contrary," I said. "This meeting was called for me." The room went still. I stepped forward and placed my folder on the table. "Effective today, Wallace Logistics will operate under a new structure. Ownership has transferred to Granite Metrics Holdings, of which I am the majority controller. As of this morning, I am your new chief executive officer." Harold's mouth opened, then closed. June's hands gripped the edge of the chair like she might fall through it. "Is this a joke?" one board member muttered. I clicked the remote on the table. Behind me, the screen lit up with a single slide. Wallace Logistics, right arrow Wallace Analytics. Redefined, reclaimed. Ready, I turned to the room. Some of you knew me as a junior accountant. Some of you never knew me at all. But for the past 2 years, I've been building the very analytics that saved this company's largest contracts. While my name was left off the reports, the data never lied. Eyes darted. Chairs shifted. Harold stood. "This is absurd," he snapped. "This is my company." "It was," I interrupted. "And then you put it up for sale." He went pale. He started, voice hoarse. "You orchestrated this." I didn't blink. "I earned this." There was silence, not fear, not celebration, just the breathless stillness of realization. I turned to the team, voice steady. "Today begins a new chapter. Wallace Analytics will prioritize transparency, data-driven decisions, and ethical leadership. We're no longer a family company. We're a future company." I let that settle. And then I nodded to security. "I'll need a list of departments reporting to the former executive team. We'll begin internal audits immediately." Harold looked at me like a stranger, and I felt no guilt. Because for the first time, I was exactly where I belonged. The first thing I did as CEO was remove the doors. Literally. The heavy oak slabs that once guarded the executive suite like a fortress, gone, replaced with glass panels. No locks. No veils. Wallace Analytics would not be run behind closed meetings and whispered orders. Not anymore. Within 48 hours, the shock of my return had settled into something colder. Fear. The long-timers, the ones Harold called his inner circle, held their breath in meetings. They avoided eye contact. A few tried to corner me in hallways with half-hearted compliments or "it's so good to see you again" smiles. But they knew I had a list, and I wasn't done. By the end of the week, I'd terminated 5 department heads, all handpicked by Harold, all promoted past their capability because they'd mastered the art of saying yes to the right man. Their severance packages were standard. Their access revoked within the hour. Some cried. Most didn't bother. Because deep down, they knew their power was borrowed. And I was repossessing everything. I held an all-hands meeting on a Monday morning, standing beneath the freshly rehung sign in the main atrium. WALLACE Analytics, the name wasn't a branding flourish. It was a message. To every woman still sitting silent in family-run boardrooms. To every employee whose ideas were taken, repackaged, and praised in someone else's voice. To the girl I used to be, sitting in a warehouse backroom, building models no one credited. This company no longer trades on name or nostalgia, I said, voice sharp and clear. We trade on clarity, we speak with data, and we build with people who know how to listen. They applauded. Not all, but enough. Later that afternoon, I summoned Harold to my office. He arrived without knocking. Old habits. He still dressed like a CEO, tailored suit, stiff collar, silver cufflinks that gleamed like medals he hadn't earned in years. "You're enjoying this," he said before I could speak. I didn't respond, just gestured for him to sit. He didn't. "I built this place," he said, jaw tight, "from nothing." I folded my hands. "And then you ignored the very mind that was holding it together." He scoffed. "You think firing a few managers and slapping your name on the building makes you a leader?" "No," I said, "but saving your sinking legacy without credit, that made me dangerous." He flinched. "You used to be grateful," he muttered. "I used to be silent." The words landed like stone. I rose from my chair, walking slowly around the desk until we stood face to face. "You built a kingdom on silence," I said, steady. "On women who smiled through erasure, who softened their edges so men like you could sleep better at night." He looked away. "But now," I continued, "this kingdom runs on truth." A long pause. "Do you want me gone?" he asked finally. "I already let you go," I said. He didn't speak again, didn't fight. Because somewhere behind the deflated pride and puffed-up regret, he knew this was the end. He turned without a word and left my office. This time the door closed behind him, not to shut me in but to keep him out. The classroom smells like dry erase markers and old ambition. It's not glamorous, just rows of plastic chairs, scuffed linoleum floors, and a projector that hums like it's still deciding whether to cooperate. But there's something about the space that feels right. Open. Earned. I teach one course every fall, business ethics and leadership transparency. It's not required, no easy A's, but my waitlist stretches 2 semesters out. "Today," I tell the room of undergrads, "we're going to talk about silence, not in a philosophical way, in a corporate one." They laugh politely, some take notes. Others sip coffee and glance at the clock, but I wait, I always do, because sooner or later they realize I'm not talking about metaphors. "I want to tell you a story," I continue, "about a girl who was very good with numbers. Too good. So good, in fact, that her family used her talent without ever admitting it was hers." Now they're listening. "There were awards she won that no one displayed, reports she wrote that others signed. She was thanked in passing, credited in whispers, erased in daylight." I walk the aisle slowly, letting the words settle. "She kept thinking that if she was just patient enough, loyal enough, small enough, someone would finally say, 'That's yours, you did that.' But they never did." In the front row, a girl in a denim jacket leans forward, notebook forgotten. "One day, they told her she wasn't a good fit, that her loyalty was questionable, that she didn't have the right head for strategy." I pause. "And so she left." The room is completely silent now. "She started something of her own, small, scrappy, unimpressive at first. But she built it with precision, quiet strength. She used the very skills they dismissed to turn risk into opportunity, fear into leverage." Someone in the back raises a hand. "What happened to the family company?" "They sold it," I say. "To her." He asks, eyebrows raised. I just smile. The class breaks into scattered laughter. A few students exchange knowing glances. "Let's just say," I reply, "sometimes the girl you forget in the back room becomes the one who owns the building." They're scribbling again now, not because it'll be on the exam, but because something in them has shifted. Before they leave, I always end the same way. Be the kind of leader who listens to the quiet ones, because if you don't, one day you'll answer to them. After class, I collect the whiteboard markers, straighten the rows of chairs. And then I pause, because on the corner of the desk is a birthday card, no name on the front, no note inside, just the words, "Still watching, still wondering." J, my mother, still unsigned, still silent, but that's all right, because I don't need her signature anymore. I have my own, one that built a company, rewrote a legacy, and now signs checks from the CEO's desk. A girl who wasn't heard until she owned the room. and now she teaches in it.